Nancy Guthrie is now in day 6. It's hard to believe that it's day 6 and so much time has passed. It comes as the family of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie.
Subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell. Turn on every notification.
We are following a significant new development in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Tonight, the focus is not on speculation. It is not on rumor. It is on something far more grounded and far more painful. An official statement from the family and one particular detail that investigators have quietly confirmed. A detail that has been sitting in plain sight from the beginning. For 51 days, this case has existed in a suspended state. No confirmed sightings, no verified communication, no electronic signal, and no public indication that Nancy is alive. But there is one object inside that home that has never moved. According to Sheriff Chris Nanos, Nancy's daily heart medication has remained on the kitchen counter exactly where she left it the night before she disappeared. Untouched, unmoved, unused. That image has become the emotional center of this case because it tells investigators something critical. Nancy depended on that medication. It was not optional. It was not something she could simply skip without consequence. She lived with a serious cardiac condition, and those pills were part of her daily survival routine. The sheriff made it clear early on that going more than 24 hours without them would place her life in immediate danger. That 24-hour window has long since passed. The medication still sitting there, frozen in time, transforms the kitchen counter into something more than a piece of evidence. It becomes a marker, a timestamp, a silent confirmation that whatever happened inside that home on February 1st did not allow her the time or freedom to prepare. Her phone was left behind. Her purse remained. Her hearing aids were still inside. Everything necessary for normal life was still in place. Investigators have stated clearly that Nancy could not walk even short distances on her own. She could not travel 50 yards without assistance. That physical limitation eliminates the possibility of voluntary departure. She did not leave that house on her own power. Something interrupted her, and when that interruption occurred, the timeline became critical. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from her phone. The Bluetooth link that transmitted her cardiac data in real time went silent. Because Bluetooth range is limited to roughly 30 feet, that moment suggests movement. She was separated from her phone, moved beyond the walls of her bedroom, taken out of signal range.
That signal has never reappeared. For 51 days. There has been no electronic trace from that device. The FBI reportedly deployed specialized aerial search equipment capable of scanning for Bluetooth signatures across desert terrain. Helicopters canvassed the foothills. Advanced detection tools were used. Nothing was found. No pulse, no beacon, no recovery. Those facts do not stand alone. They connect to the kitchen counter. They connect to the medication. They connect to the physical reality of her health, and when taken together, they narrow the window of possibility. By the morning of February 2nd, Nancy had gone more than 24 hours without her medication. That was the threshold publicly identified as potentially fatal. Investigators have had to confront an uncomfortable question. Did the person responsible understand her medical condition beforehand, or did events spiral in a way that was never part of the plan? Because this case shows signs of planning, the sheriff has referred to it as targeted. Former federal agents reviewing the timeline have described it as deliberate. And now, the family's latest statement introduces language that shifts the emotional frame even further. Savannah spoke publicly on day 24 in a way that changed the tone of this investigation. She described darkness becoming the cover for taking her mother from her own bedroom. She described sleepless nights. She described hope not as a flame, but as embers. Embers. Not gone, but fading. And then, she acknowledged something that stunned many viewers. She admitted that the family understood it was possible they had already lost Nancy. Those were not impulsive words. They were measured, careful, weighted. They came from someone receiving regular briefings, someone who understands the medical and forensic reality is at play. When a daughter begins to speak publicly about the possibility of loss rather than rescue, it signals a shift. Now, on day 50, the family released another statement. The tone was controlled, structured, deliberate. They thanked the Tucson community. They emphasized that their energy remains focused on bringing Nancy home. But one phrase stood out. They said they cannot truly grieve until she is laid to rest in her final place. That language carries implication. Final place. Rest. Peace. Those are not the words of a family anticipating recovery and reunion. They are the words of people preparing themselves for a different outcome. The medical timeline supports that interpretation. The pacemaker's silence supports it. The untouched medication reinforces it. Yet officially, no arrest has been made. No suspect has been named, and no body has been recovered. The case remains active. Forensic evidence is reportedly under review. Genetic genealogy analysis is ongoing. Investigators are examining phone records from late January. The January 11th reconnaissance detail mentioned in the family statement suggests this was not impulsive.
It suggests prior presence, prior study, a rehearsal. If someone returned 3 weeks after an initial visit, that indicates planning. But planning does not always account for medical fragility. Some analysts have floated the possibility that an initial ransom motive could have collapsed quickly if Nancy's health deteriorated rapidly. There has never been a verified public ransom exchange through official channels. That absence remains notable. However, speculation does not equal evidence, and investigators appear focused on data. Sheriff Nanos has stated publicly that substantial information remains confidential. That statement matters. It implies investigative progress beyond what has been disclosed. There are threads in motion the public cannot yet see. Meanwhile, online speculation has targeted individuals close to the family. The sheriff directly addressed that behavior, invoking past cases where innocent people were wrongly accused for years before the true perpetrator was identified. That warning was intentional. It suggests investigators are following evidence, not noise. Nancy was 84 years old, born January 27th, 1942. A mother, a grandmother, a woman who lived in the same home for decades. Her routines were known. Her faith was known. Her life was stable. She did not live recklessly. She did not travel unpredictably. Her disappearance required access, planning, and opportunity. The medication on the counter, the silent pacemaker, the absence of struggle visible to neighbors, the lack of digital ransom communication. Each piece forms a structure. Justice in this case does not depend on survival. It depends on identification, on evidence, on forensic resolution. Modern investigations do not rely solely on confession. They rely on digital mapping, genetic tracing, and behavioral reconstruction. Somewhere, investigators believe there is a name attached to January 11th, to February 1st, to the man visible on the porch at 1:47 a.m. And if genetic genealogy produces even a partial familial link, the narrowing process can accelerate quickly. This case is not static. The family's words may reflect grief, but law enforcement language continues to reflect motion. The medication has not moved in 51 days, but the investigation has. If anyone noticed unusual presence in the Catalina foothills on January 11th or during the final days of January, that detail may matter now more than ever. The FBI tip line remains active. More than $1 million in reward money is reportedly available. Sometimes, resolution comes not from a dramatic breakthrough, but from a single observation finally connected to a larger pattern. For now, the kitchen counter remains unchanged, and that still image continues to define this case. Because while the medication remained untouched on the counter, the rest of the evidence tells investigators that something was in motion long before February 1st.
The family's statement introduced a detail that deserves careful attention. Forensic evidence, they said, suggests there was deliberate reconnaissance of the area on January 11th, roughly 3 weeks before Nancy was taken. That changes the frame entirely. If someone was present at the home on January 11th, studying the property, observing the layout, testing visibility, noting lighting conditions, then February 1st was not spontaneous. It was selected. 3 weeks is not coincidence. It is preparation. Investigators reportedly treat January 11th as a dry run, a visit that did not escalate into violence but provided information, and the kind of controlled approach someone makes when they are measuring risk. That raises immediate operational questions. What time was that earlier visit? How long did the individual remain in the area? Did neighbors notice anyone unfamiliar? Were any cameras disrupted or tested that night? Because when someone rehearses a crime, they are not only studying the target, they are studying response. The Catalina foothills is not a high-traffic urban block. It is a quiet residential area where unfamiliar presence tends to register, which means anyone conducting reconnaissance there would need either confidence or cover. Investigators have reportedly been reviewing phone data from that date, comparing device activity from January 11th to February 1st. Digital convergence matters. If a single device appears in the same location on both nights, that pattern narrows quickly. Cell tower logs do not guess. They record, and in a case defined by silence, digital repetition becomes valuable. There is also the matter of the porch camera. At 1:47 a.m., Nancy's doorbell device was disabled. The timing was precise. Not random, not clumsy. That suggests prior awareness of where cameras were mounted and how they functioned. It is difficult to disable surveillance effectively without understanding its range, which brings investigators back to the possibility of surveillance prior to the abduction. The family's statement acknowledging a January 11th visit reinforces that this was not an opportunistic act. It was layered. Some experts have argued that when planning is evident, motive becomes more focused. Random violence tends to lack rehearsal. Targeted crimes often included, but motive has not been publicly confirmed. There was early speculation about ransom, yet no verified public demand emerged through official channels, no structured negotiation, no authenticated proof of life communication. That absence stands out. In high-profile kidnappings with financial motive, communication usually follows quickly. Time becomes leverage. Here, time passed without structured contact. That opens two possibilities investigators would logically explore. Either communication occurred privately and was withheld from the public, or the original plan did not unfold as intended. Nancy's medical vulnerability may have changed the trajectory rapidly.
If someone abducted her without fully understanding her health dependency, as events could have escalated within hours. And that possibility intersects directly with the pacemaker timeline. At 2:28 a.m., the Bluetooth connection severed. Blood evidence was later located near the porch area. That suggests struggle or injury during removal. If physical stress occurred, and if medical care was not administered immediately, deterioration could have been swift. Those are difficult realities to confront, but investigators are required to confront them. Meanwhile, attention has turned to individuals near the family. Tommaso, Nancy's son-in-law, and reportedly one of the last people to see her alive, remained silent publicly for 51 days. When he appeared at the March 2nd memorial alongside Savannah and Annie, online speculation intensified.
Social media users began comparing his walk to that of the masked individual seen on camera. Sheriff Nanos addressed that directly. He invoked the case of Isabel Celis, another Tucson investigation where suspicion wrongly focused on the victim's father for years before evidence eventually identified a neighbor. The comparison was deliberate. It served as a warning against projection. From an analytical standpoint, public resemblance is not forensic evidence. Gait comparisons require controlled analysis, not visual intuition from grainy footage. Law enforcement has publicly cleared Tommaso. Speculation may feel productive online, but it does not advance an investigation. The sheriff also revealed something else in that same discussion.
He stated that there is substantial confidential information in this case that cannot yet be disclosed. That matters. It implies evidentiary movement behind the scenes. DNA remains under review. Genetic genealogy remains active. And when genealogy is active, it means investigators believe there is a viable biological profile worth tracing. Modern forensic genealogy does not require a perfect match. It requires a distant one. If a relative of a suspect has uploaded DNA to a public or semi-public database, analysts can begin constructing family trees outward. It is meticulous work, but once a branch connects, the narrowing accelerates. This process is quiet by nature. There are no dramatic press conferences during genealogy mapping. There are spreadsheets, lineage charts, cross-referenced birth records. And if that work is ongoing, it suggests confidence in the quality of recovered material. The family's recent donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children
also drew attention. While primarily philanthropic, the timing added emotional weight. Observers noted that such gestures often accompany a shift in expectation. But investigators cannot move on expectation. They move on verification.
The January 11th reconnaissance detail remains central. If someone was testing the perimeter that night, neighbors may have noticed something small at the time that now feels different in retrospect. A vehicle idling longer than normal. A figure standing still in darkness. A light flickering where it should not have. Memory becomes sharper when context arrives. That is why law enforcement often recanvasses weeks later, because new information reframes old observations. The FBI tip line remains active. More than $1 million in reward funds remain available. Cases that appear frozen externally are often highly active internally. Investigative pressure builds quietly, and pressure changes dynamics. If more than one person was involved, reward incentives can fracture loyalty. History shows that multi-person conspiracies rarely remain sealed indefinitely. Someone talks. Sometimes it is guilt. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is financial calculation. But silence rarely survives sustained scrutiny forever. For now, the evidence tells two parallel stories. Inside the house, time stopped on February 1st. Outside of it, investigators are reconstructing weeks prior to that morning, searching for repetition, for rehearsal, for the individual who returned after January 11th. Nancy's family has begun publicly acknowledging the possibility of loss. Law enforcement has not. That distinction matters. Grief and investigation do not move at the same speed. One prepares for outcome, the other pursues proof. And proof in this case may hinge on something small that felt unimportant at the time. A second visit, a recurring device, a name connected through lineage. The silence since 2:28 a.m. does not mean nothing happened afterward. It means nothing has been confirmed publicly. But confirmation often follows patience. And as this case moves past the 50-day mark, the emphasis is shifting from hope of rescue to certainty of identification. The medication remains untouched, but the timeline before February 1st is now under deeper scrutiny than ever. By now, the emotional direction of this case is impossible to ignore. The family's words suggest preparation for loss. The medical evidence suggests urgency past early. The digital silence suggests removal beyond immediate recovery. But investigations do not end with emotional conclusions. They end with names. And right now, the focus appears to be narrowing. Sheriff Nanos has been careful with his wording in recent interviews. He has repeated that the case remains active. He has acknowledged significant confidential information. And when asked directly whether investigators are closer, he has not dismissed that possibility. Language matters in investigations. Officials rarely overstate progress. They rarely promise movement without reason. When they say substantial information exists but cannot yet be shared, that often signals that threads are converging. Behind the scenes, several streams of analysis are reportedly running at once. DNA testing remains ongoing. Genetic genealogy remains active. Cell phone records from late January are being mapped. Device presence near the home is being cross-referenced across multiple dates, and one date continues to stand out.
January 11th. If that earlier visit was indeed a reconnaissance attempt, investigators would be searching for repetition.
A phone that pinged both nights, a vehicle recorded in the area more than once, a digital trace that overlaps. Digital footprints are rarely perfect, but they are persistent. Every smartphone connects to towers. Every tower logs timestamps. Every router registers probes when a device comes within range. Even if the suspect attempted to disable cameras, digital residue often survives. There's also the matter of physical evidence near the porch. Blood was confirmed. That detail alone anchors the case in violence rather than voluntary departure, and blood carries DNA. DNA carries lineage. Lineage carries identity. If a profile was extracted, and if it is suitable for genealogical comparison, investigators may not need a confession. They need a match. Modern cases have shown how quickly that narrowing can occur once a partial family connection is identified. A distant cousin uploads DNA. Analysts build outward. A branch narrows. Age range aligns. Geographic proximity matches. And suddenly, a theoretical suspect becomes a defined individual. That process is slow publicly, but methodical privately. Meanwhile, a law enforcement has reportedly re-engaged the neighborhood with more specific questions. That is not regression. It is refinement. When new data arrives, investigators often revisit prior witnesses to test memory against updated timelines. Did anyone see a vehicle idling near midnight on January 11th? Did anyone notice repeated presence over several evenings? Did construction activity in the area provide cover for extended observation? The Catalina foothills is not anonymous terrain. It is structured residential geography. Wide streets, limited foot traffic, predictable patterns, which means sustained presence would require either familiarity or justification. If the suspect had local knowledge, that suggests connection. If the suspect did not, that suggests preparation. Either path narrows the field. There's also psychological pressure building quietly. More than $1 million in reward money remains available. That number does not sit idle. It circulates in conversation. It becomes visible. It becomes tempting. If more than one individual had knowledge of what happened, that pressure compounds over time. Multi-person crimes rarely remain silent indefinitely. Loyalty erodes. Fear increases. Financial incentive shifts calculation. Someone may already be feeling that weight. The family's public tone has shifted toward finality, but investigators have not declared final outcome. That distinction remains critical. In previous cases, prolonged silence preceded sudden resolution. An arrest made weeks after public attention waned. A suspect identified through a genealogical lead no one saw coming. This case shows signs of similar structure. The January 11th rehearsal detail implies confidence. The February 1st execution implies precision. The pacemaker silence implies urgency. The medication implies vulnerability. Taken together, they form a narrative of targeted action, with consequences that may not have been fully anticipated. And if something did go wrong quickly, that could explain the absence of credible ransom demand. A plan interrupted by medical reality. A timeline compressed unexpectedly. That remains analytical, not confirmed. But investigations often examine whether intent diverged from outcome. Nancy was 84. She relied on cardiac support. She had limited mobility. Those are not neutral variables. They shape risk. As of now, no arrest has been announced. No suspect has been publicly named. But the absence of announcement does not equal absence of progress. Sheriff Nanos has stated that justice does not depend on public speculation. It depends on evidence. Evidence moves quietly. If genealogy identifies even a distant relative, if digital mapping confirms device overlap, if construction worker rosters intersect with phone data, the narrowing becomes direct. Somewhere in Tucson, perhaps someone believes this case will fade. History suggests otherwise. Modern forensic capability does not rely on immediate confession. It relies on accumulation, on pattern, on trace. And if a distant relative uploads DNA tomorrow, if a forgotten device connects retroactively to a timeline, if one person decides the reward outweighs silence, this case could change rapidly. For the Guthrie family, a grief has already begun its slow transformation. They speak of peace, of rest, a final place. For investigators, the work continues in a different register. Nancy's medication remains where it was left. Her pacemaker remains silent. Her home remains still. But the investigative machinery around those facts remains in motion. If anyone noticed something on January 11th that felt insignificant at the time, that detail may now carry weight. If anyone recalls repeated presence in the foothills during late January, that memory may matter. The FBI tip line remains open. The reward remains active. The case remains unsolved. And unsolved does not mean unsolvable. Justice may move slowly, but it moves. And when it arrives, it often arrives without warning.